I just wanted to do a short video on a book entitled Radium Lost and Found that was written by a professor by the name of Robert Taft. Now, just a bit of backstory on the radium relevant to this instance. Most people know, most popularly from the Radium Girls, that radium was most often used in luminous paint around this time, particularly for military applications, but also civilian clocks, watches, compasses, etc. But something that doesn't get talked about nearly as much is radium's use in the medical field. Now, radium was actually one of the very first means of treating cancer via radiation, and it was extremely effective. It was extremely, I don't want to say barbaric, but primitive by today's standards, but it did work and quite well. So instead of supplying radium for luminous paint, Taft, in addition to his position as a professor, he had a side business providing radium to medical applications, and that would come in the form of needles. Now, these needles would be literally inserted into the human body, into or adjacent to tumors in an effort to shrink them. Now, Taft had this position in business supplying these things, but occasionally these things were lost because when we're talking needles, we are talking needles. Like, these things are small, less than the weight of a paperclip in a lot of cases, and occasionally they would get lost. They would be left in waste receptacles and tossed down drains and accidentally dropped, and they would be stolen, resulting in what may be some of the first ever orphan source incidents. Now, Taft's book talks a lot about quite a few different cases, and some very unique cases for that matter, not all of which are his, although he did personally take part in, I believe, if I recall correctly, dozens of radium recovery operations, and it's also worth noting just how expensive radium was at this time. In I believe around like 1910, 1920, a single gram of radium went for over $100,000. I mean, we are not talking about a cheap substance. It was quite literally one of the most expensive things you could purchase at the time. So if you have a needle for cancer treatment that was 25 or 50 milligrams, we are talking thousands upon thousands of dollars, well over the average worker's salary here. So these things which were getting lost quite often were getting lost while having this value placed over their head of a substantial amount. So just as a quick aside, I felt that worth bringing up just to talk about how crazy it is that somebody could misplace something so expensive. But there are some pretty entertaining incidents that Taft was both a part of, and also that associates of his were a part of. Now, it's worth briefly talking about just exactly what Taft was using to find this radium. For a while, he was using something called a gold leaf electroscope, and that is a very simple device that measures the depletion of static electricity. It holds a charge, and ionizing radiation depletes the charge. So by measuring the depletion, you can measure how much ionizing radiation there is. And for the first several decades, pretty much up until the Manhattan Project, for the first several decades, gold leaf electroscopes were actually the primary means of studying and cataloging radiation, in addition to things like spinthariscopes and other fluorescent screens. But Taft had quite a unique one with its own charging system, which, compared to your very rudimentary electroscope that you might find in a physics laboratory these days, is quite advanced. But despite it being a very simple machine, uncalibrated, if I recall correctly from his published study talking about the design of it, despite it being very simple and rudimentary, it did work. And that was not his Radium Hound for a while. The Radium Hound would be the nickname that he would often give the device. It was also sort of a general colloquialism for any sort of device that was used to track down lost radium. He eventually moved to a Geiger-Müller tube-based device, which is our modern Geiger counter. I can't recall if it was him or if it was one of his associates that he also wrote about in the book, but somebody also used an early ionization chamber, kind of similar in concept to what design would be used in a survey meter like the CDV 715 or 717. But mostly what's worth talking about in this book, aside from some of the nerdy fun science things, is the bizarre stories of how radium would be lost and how it would be found. There was one incident of a radium needle that was, I believe, carted off in a refuse pile and eventually brought to a local pig farm. And when the searchers went out there with gold leaf electroscopes, they realized that their electroscopes were detecting radiation coming from one of the pigs. So the pig, after essentially eating hospital rubbish, had actually it had the needle inside of its digestive tract, so they needed to call a butcher to slaughter the pig and get their needle back. There was another one where I want to say it was stolen and then somebody found it, if I recall correctly, where somebody didn't know what the needle was and they decided to use it as a needle on their gramophone, and apparently it just sounded absolutely terrible. There was another one where a radium needle found its way into a concrete supply that was subsequently used to make a sidewalk, and it was found embedded within the sidewalk, but it was determined to be so expensive that it wouldn't be worth getting out. So somewhere there is a radium needle still in a sidewalk, because at least according to the information that Taft brought forward, it was never taken out. And furthermore, the source that he got the story from had destroyed their records, so they couldn't even tell you exactly where it was. So it's somewhere out there, possibly in the United States somewhere. If there is still a sidewalk from the 1930s around, it could very well just have a needle still encased in it. And that is just a taste of these stories. There is genuinely, seemingly limitless amount of stories regarding the loss and finding of radium supplies, and I highly recommend that anyone who has a passing interest in the early days of radioactivity read this book, because it is quite unique. It's available for free on a site by the name of Hathi Trust or Hathi Trust, one of those two. I can't recall exactly which. I wasn't able to download the entire PDF, but I was able to download individual pages. I will put a link to it down in the description, and I highly recommend that if you have an interest in this, to go read it, because it is genuinely one of the best reads that I've had on this topic ever. And for those of you that aren't in the mood to read the entire book, there is a series of a couple of articles over at Oak Ridge Associated University. Their museum has a selection of some of the more strange stories, and it also puts it in the context of modern health physics and dosimetry. It talks about how one of these instances was the first case of the first known case in the author's knowledge of a grid search being used to locate a radioactive source. And I just think that that's really interesting. I'm an amateur. I know very little, and I would like to drive that home almost every episode that I do, just to kind of give you an example of, this is not so much me telling you what to think about this thing, but it is me telling you, hey, I love this thing, you should go search it out for yourself to do your own learning, because I know very little. And if you only have a short period of time and aren't able to read the entire book, I do recommend those articles. They are like a 5 or 10 minute read. So, highly recommended, and hope that you folks enjoy. Bye-bye.